biggest question to come out of the Sao Paulo GP was, what was that song that was sung to Max? Simply, he and his dad listened to Tom Jones ad nauseum on long van journeys to different karting events across Europe. So this wasn't just some random song that GP played over the radio. This was actually something that held a lot of significance to Max Verstappen, and I will admit, that was incredibly wholesome. To acknowledge the fact that Max Verstappen had broken the record for the percentage of wins during a season that Alberto Ascari had since the 1950s. So I think that's already an absolute win for Max. Another little win I would like to say is the fact that that impeding situation that we saw in Mexico was quickly remedied. Put simply, you have to move to the side, move over to the left, and let other cars pass, which Max Verstappen was doing very, very frequently, and not really caring about his floor almost. I was really pleased that that was sorted out, and a lot of people were concerned as well. It wasn't just me. But my goodness, I told you they weren't washed. Aston Martin came back in a big way. Walking back a lot of the upgrades that they had issue with, they simply got their setup correct. And this wasn't a fluke. That Friday qualifying where they got third and fourth, the second row, at the beginning of the race when we saw Lando and Lewis going right past them, we all thought that was going to be the case. They would be lucky to get points, but no, they just simply bogged down the start. And we got one of the best examples of Fernando Alonso being one of the greatest of all time. This is a fantastic modern example of why Fernando's so good. Imola 2005 against Michael Schumacher. Valencia 2012. This performance against Checo. I mean, wow. That just made me fall in love all over again. It just shows that you don't have to be a faster car to stay ahead. You just have to drive smart. And big bonus points to Checo as well for keeping it clean. And just seeing them hug after the race, and they really knew they had a good fight there. They were very respectful. And it was by half a tenth. That was crazy. That was probably even closer than we saw between Gasly and Hamilton in 2019. And as for Stroll, wow, that was probably his best weekend of the entire season after Sky Sports probed Mike Crack. I'm not joking. Simon Lazenby did say that. Probed Mike Crack. But either way, I'm really glad that Aston Martin can finish this season with some really good results and get Fernando his 8th podium and Lance Stroll P5. If they can just get that little bit closer to McLaren, give them a little bit of a spook to say, hey, you're not getting P4 just yet. We are still closing in. They have managed to pull the gap in a little bit because Oscar Piastri had his own maladies. We'll talk about that later, but still, well done, Aston Martin. I'm glad that you managed to show people that you're not done yet and that 2024 will be very exciting. They're now back on the right path in terms of upgrades. My last point on all that, seeing Lance Stroll with Charles and Max in qualifying when he was in the top 3, they just looked at him so awkwardly, like, what are you doing here? And then Lance was like, I don't know, man. I'm just here, I guess. Okay, Norris. Despite his misfire in qualifying and McLaren sort of not getting the timings right, he did manage to bounce back from that and get a very solid performance. Probably one of his most commanding performances of the season. We all thought that Austin was a really good one, and that Mexico was a good burn from the Stern campaign. But the transformation into Lando Prime, as I say, is slowly progressing more and more. He was the only driver that could get close to Max and make Max try a little bit harder than he has been throughout the entire season. He had to be aware of what Lando was doing, and getting the fastest lap by a considerable margin, that was like Lando going shot across the bow to Red Bull going like, hey, I'm coming for you, Max. Max was goading him in the press conference saying, oh, it's like I'm dangling a cookie to Lando, but that's just pure banter. There's nothing mean behind that. They get on famously. By the way, he broke a trophy again. At least it wasn't Max's. AlphaTauri, bad luck. I mean, that was just a freak occurrence. Hülkenberg just flips the errant tyre up, it bounces off Daniel's wing, it then hits Oscar's wing, so it was a double whammy for the Australian drivers. It was crazy. But in the end, it just meant that he was consigned to the back after a very unlucky time in the sprint where he was so close to P8 and yet he came up with Butkus. But we all have to remember here, folks, that AlphaTauri, they scored points, 5 of them. Almost as much as they did in Mexico. And who scored them? Another winner, Yuki Tsunoda. Now, people were quick to judge about Yuki in Mexico, saying, oh, he's terrible again, he hasn't learned. And of course, he still has a way to learn to curb his aggression. This weekend, he was much better. He got 3 points in the sprint, was very convincing, made good use of the soft tyres that they allocated for him, and then in the race, he did more of the same. Sure, it was only P9. It wasn't like the P6, P7 battle that it was so close for Daniel in Mexico, but it was another set of points. They're only 8 points behind Williams now, so them getting 7th place is quite doable now. He has been clutch throughout the entire season, giving AlphaTauri something to cheer for. Those P10s back in the early days have been proving to be crucial. And now he gets 5 points, whereas Daniel scored none. I'm glad that Daniel's managing to find progress again, but you can't ignore Yuki. Another thing I can't ignore is Gasly. This is turning out to be very fascinating. I think there is going to be a balance of power shift going into 2024 because Gasly had a very quiet weekend, managed to make up for his 2-place grid penalty for impeding and all of the chicanery he had with Ocon in the pit lane, and managed to get a P7. No one really rated Alpine to do all of that well, but hey, he got 6 points. And sure, it's not really going to impact the team. They are very clearly going to be 6th place. But in terms of the Drivers' Championship, Pierre is now 16 points ahead of Esteban, who has been constantly the senior driver, the lead driver of the French team. In a time where the team is trying to break away from its years of division, its lack of direction, Pierre is really in the pound seat to try and change things, to make him the driver that the team should really circle itself around, icing out Esteban, who's clearly making more and more mistakes and becoming less and less popular. He is becoming a disruptor at a time that Alpine is trying to disrupt itself going into a new era. This could lead to a very interesting change in the driver lineup come 2025 because both drivers are up for a contract renewal. I will bounce back to Checo again because this was a very solid, quiet weekend after the tumultuous time of it in Mexico, his own home race. He got podium in the sprint, very, very good, and he got a P4. He was so close to making it 2 podiums this weekend, and he had a really, really solid battle with Fernando. It was clean, it was respectful, there were no moments where it looked like they were going to collide. This was Perez at his best. This was the Checo that we need to see. And also, it's managed to help him pull away from Lewis at a time when Mercedes are just nowhere. They are directionless. And now Checo is able to capitalize on that because he outscored Hamilton in both races this weekend. This is crucial. I think Checo's got it now. I think he's just about secured it. And if he can give something that Red Bull's never had, this will help him secure his seat for 2024. Whether he stays for 2025, I don't know. I don't think he will, but at least he'll be able to see out his contract, which is a big win for him. Now we go to the meh section, neither good nor terrible. And I will put Alpine here because they had a very scruffy start to the weekend with both drivers getting penalties for impeding and then Ocon crashing into an old teammate. But they did make some good headway in the race. They both scored points, which is good. Pierre, like I said, got P7. This was a very solid points haul considering the situation they found themselves in on Friday. I will give them some slack here because they are really trying to rediscover themselves. And we've said that about Renault and Alpine so many times over the years that it's really lost all meaning. But this time around, it genuinely feels like Bruno Famin is trying to find some new direction for the team. And this is good. And I feel like Pierre will definitely be at the root of all of that. He will build the team around him, I reckon. And maybe I'll give a nod to Logan Sargent as well. This was a very quiet weekend. He got some very good overtakes in. He didn't have any accidents. And whilst Alex Albon was unfortunate at the beginning of the race, Logan just kept at it. He kept going at a time when Williams didn't really look like a good car and was not that far away from points. Sure, 10 seconds, but it was better than what the other cars that survived were able to do. So you got to give it a plus here. This is another tidy race for Logan and maybe another justification for him staying for one more year as Williams are transforming into what they want to be. Now, okay, losers. I am so close to putting Ocon in the dark bit because oh my goodness. It happened at the same corner, folks. Turn 2 and Ocon, they do not go well together. 2018 with Max, now with Fernando in 2023. He was just so determined to say, it wasn't my fault, it was Fernando's fault. Even the stewards didn't think that. Nobody was to blame here, that it was a racing incident. But it was quite clear that Esteban was mostly in the wrong. He lost control, and Fernando was right there, away from the racing line, and he got hit. And that camera that Alonso has, just seeing that impact, the sound, oh, that made me wince. It makes me wince every time I see it. My goodness. I do love that camera angle, by the way. It's so intense. They do need to work on the gyro a little bit, but I think they'll work on that. They'll improve on that for next year. But either way, Ocon, my goodness, just the stubbornness from him, just the determination to not be blamed. This was not a good look for him. I feel like he is losing his grip on the commanding seat at Alpine. Gasly is undermining him by doing what a driver is supposed to do: get points. His reputation in F1, Esteban's, is getting worse and worse, and I really wouldn't be surprised if Gasly puts in tidy performances. There may not be room for Esteban. They may not want to continue with this potentially explosive lineup and go somewhere else. Ocon might be out of a seat. Where he would go, I don't know. It's not looking as secure for Esteban than it did a year ago at Alpine. I'm not really going to talk about Mercedes too much because I already made a video about that. You can go and watch that there, tab that for later. But this was a race where I really feel like Mercedes really need to look in the mirror and realign their expectations. They are not the leading team anymore. They have to do what McLaren and Ferrari are doing and manage their expectations. A P5 for a leading team would be terrible. But for McLaren or Ferrari, P5, it's not too bad, it's alright. And it's really going to save them a lot of headaches and a lot of woe and sadness and just beating themselves up. At least Toto is willing to acknowledge that there is something wrong, that it's inexcusable that they are performing this badly. But they're not acting like a team anymore. They're not acting like what they're supposed to be. They are meant to be a challenging team and not giving George Russell any room to try at least some kind of strategy. We don't really know for sure whether George would have been able to catch up to Lance Stroll, but he should have been at least given a chance to. And then if it didn't work, he could have fallen back behind Lewis. Maybe that might have solved the cooling issues a little bit. Might have made him last a little longer. We don't know for sure. We don't know the data. But the point is, though, is that Mercedes are really not understanding how to be a challenger. They are used to being the victor, and that needs to change. And George, I think he's starting to get a little bit concerned because there is Kimi Antonelli in F2, the new Mercedes Wunderkind, and he's being fast-tracked to Formula 2 in a car which is more relevant to Formula 1. And if Antonelli gets in the top 3 in his rookie season, he is guaranteed a slot at a team. Would it be Williams? Probably, because they might be looking for a better driver, and if Antonelli's the new hotness, then why not put him in with Albon? And then if he does well there, and Russell's up for contract, oh dear, I wouldn't be surprised if we get a driver swap. Antonelli goes to Mercedes to partner Lewis if he continues to stay, or maybe Russell goes back to Williams because he felt more comfortable there. A Russell-Albon partnership? Not bad. But yeah, if you want to hear more about my thoughts about Mercedes, go and watch the video. Now, okay, I've got to say, the track facilities, oh my goodness. Yes, of course, I know. Sao Paulo, that area of the world, it does get some very unexpected weather. We've seen that throughout the years at Interlagos and around the surrounding area. But the point is that it was not safe. People were hurt. Luckily, not seriously. And the winds just tore the awnings over the grandstands, and some of them collapsed. The organisers were very lucky that it wasn't worse. Now, unfortunately, I would have to put Ferrari here as well in the losers category. Not by much though, because Charles was looking good for at least a shot at the podium, and that would have easily made Mercedes' weekend even worse. Ferrari would have been right behind Mercedes had Charles finished, but no, he had a hydraulics failure, which affected a lot of the Ferrari-powered cars. I think both Alfa Romeos suffered from it. So, I mean, there's really not much to say about Alfa. They just had a really anonymous weekend, and then both cars gave up the ghost. But as for Charles, my goodness, man, even he doesn't know about where his luck's gone. He has no clue. And then just seeing wandering around the track, trying to find a way back to the pits, that was just really sad. The cameras were just loving that, weren't they? But either way, Sainz managed to find something and get a decent result of sorts, considering that a lot of the staff were really afflicted by food poisoning over the weekend, and a lot of them had to call in sick, which led, I think, to a bizarre situation where Robert Schwartzman, one of their academy drivers, was manning the pit wall looking extremely stressed. If they managed to get near a podium with Charles and a decent result with Carlos, that would have been a huge achievement. I would have definitely put them in the winner category for that, considering they were short-staffed. But yeah, not the best weekend for Ferrari, but Mercedes kind of had it worse. So I'll cut them some slack. Williams, I mean, that was just bad luck in qualifying, wasn't it? Albon didn't even have a chance to get into Q2. And then the race, he got taken out in turn 1 through no fault of his own, with another sandwich that Hulkenberg is now finding himself in. And then Logan managed to find some silver lining with P11, a very tidy result, but Williams clearly were not a good car this weekend. I think they are just looking to Vegas, their last chance to score some potentially big points with that long straight. I reckon they're going to go aggressive here. They're going to go with a Monza setup, I reckon. Just focus on the straight. Then my boy Piastri's got to be down here, I'm afraid, because this weekend, he just had missed opportunities, didn't he? There was that moment in practice where he and Lando were onto some really fast times, and then they aborted the lap. So you were thinking both of them are going to be good. Now, of course, Lando turned out to be good, but Oscar, he really didn't have that much luck. Q2, he looked amazing. The early parts of qualifying, Piastri was on it right behind Max. So you were thinking, oh, both McLarens up in the top 5. Excellent. But then the rain came, the wind came, Oscar got spun out, he didn't get a time, then the sprint happened, he sort of fell away, he didn't really impress there, and this was just one thing after another. Then his rear wing got caught, like with Daniel. He was a lap down. They really need to change that, the FIA. Like, they red flagged the race in lap 3 when it was clear this was going to take a long time to clear up. They should have red flagged the race immediately. Maybe anyone afflicted by a turn 1 incident at lap 1, then they maybe just reset the race and go again from where it was at the first sector, perhaps? I don't know. Either way, it needs to be looked at. But Oscar, he just had bad luck. But he was managed to salvage something, but he didn't really have a good pace on the mediums, though. Just unfortunate. All the while, Lando is really putting in the performances, which is reminding everybody that, yeah, Oscar is good. He is a really good teammate to Lando, helping him push on to becoming Lando Prime. But Oscar is still a rookie. He's still got things to learn. Next year, though, he will be better. But this is good practice, though, at a track he's not familiar with. Okay, Haas, my goodness. You know what? I'm going to consider that teammates taking each other out almost, albeit slightly indirectly. Just another sandwich incident with Hülkenberg like he had in Qatar, with Ocon and Checo. That was just dire. They had a decent qualifying position of 11th and 12th, so that was good, but they didn't capitalize on it. Magnussen was taken out. Hülkenberg wasn't affected as badly. He did finish 12th, so that was something. He was close to points, but it was just a really, really just scrappy weekend. That was just, oh my goodness. They were close, but the fact that Magnussen got taken out and, okay, maybe next year will be better. Anyway, one of the big talking points here, aside from Alonso's brilliant battle with Checo, is the fact that Mercedes are imploding. But I really want to turn your attention back to the whole Gasly situation. I feel this is something that could be really interesting here, and who could be his teammate? Well, I'm still gonna hang my hat on the Mick Schumacher peg, which you can see here next.